Hi, welcome back to the Trailhead Outdoors Show, and today we're going to talk about why I, as an outdoorsman, am a ham radio operator, and why you, as an outdoorsman, should be too. Reason number one, anything regulated by the government, they will take away if you do not use it. That's just a fact of life. Doesn't matter where ham radio operating privileges, which, by the way, are specifically under attack because, let's face it, there are a lot of telecom organizations out there that would love to get their hands on the frequencies available currently for United States residents. Number two, cell phones suck. Yes, absolutely, cell phones have come a long way since their inception. And even in most of our lifetimes, you remember going from basically 0 to 60 in 2.4 seconds. But what it really boils down to is cell phones are still reliant heavily on a encompassing network that if you're outside of, they're absolutely useless other than to maybe weigh down your map so it doesn't blow away in the wind. Cell phones are wonderful when they work. However, we as outdoorsmen know darn well that there are plenty of areas in which cell phones are completely, utterly useless. As a ham radio operator, you then have access to a great multitude of frequencies and radio systems that have better coverage in areas that cell phones may not, and give you access to thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of ham radio operators who may be able to aid you in the case of an actual emergency. Number three, ham radio gives you access to basic communication options. I realize we kind of just touched on this in the whole cell phones suck thing. However, it doesn't really fully encompass that topic. So number three, of course, is that it gives you basic communication options. For any excursion that you are taking to endeavor, it gives you basic communication options. So one of the things that I do often is I always have a ham radio with me when I go on my outdoor excursions by myself, specifically hiking, because my ham radio has better coverage and better options when it comes to communicating with my home base, for lack of a better term, than local cell phones do. The area I like to hike the most is not that far outside civilization, but due to topography and other factors, it is terrible when it comes to cell service. So as a result, with my home base being my home with a base radio, and a good old antenna way up in the air, my home base is able to reach me where cell phones actually cannot. Now, of course, I do have some dead areas in which the topography, the forestry, and other factors affect my reception, which is the same things that affect the cell phone. However, due to the system that I have in place, someone from my home base, I keep wanting to say QTH, that's why I keep saying home base in such a weird way, because I want to say QTH. For those of you who don't know what QTH means, it is what's known as a Q code that basically refers to your home base. So, gives you communication options so that you are able to communicate with your party and your party with you in the case of a non-emergency if you just need basic communications for your outdoor outing. Reason number four, like a lot of our other cross-paths hobbies, ham radio operators, many of which are also interested in outdoor activities. If you think about it, a lot of our other hobbies that we like to get into sometimes cross paths with each other. Perfect example of that is I like to work on four-wheel drive vehicles specifically. Vehicles in general. I do most of my own maintenance, but specifically I like to work on four-wheel drive vehicles. I enjoy the four-wheel drive vehicles not just for the four-wheeling itself, but those vehicles I modify in such ways to better suit them to get me from point A to point B, wherever it is that I want to be, specifically to my next outdoor excursion. Ham radio also can have a crossover element to it, such as you can utilize it outdoors as much as indoors, and therefore it crosses over from one hobby to another. Just like any other hobby, like I was just explaining with the working on four-wheel drive vehicles, it can be a good crossover hobby. Reason number five is community. You as an outdoorsman know that community is important. Let's face it, there is a vast number of different types of outdoor communities, whether we're talking about hunters, hikers, campers, motorhome campers. I separate them because if anybody's ever been out west, you know that that's a community unto itself, and they're different from the everyday camper. But community is very important, especially in the ham radio world. I mean, we're talking about a hobby that is entirely based on communication, which, I mean, you're literally out there talking to people. It's very much a community-based hobby. And anytime you have a crossover hobby like that, again, we're back to that reason, anytime you have a crossover hobby like that both have inclusive communities, your goals may actually also be mutually inclusive. It's maybe something as simple as, you're both looking for the rights to certain or privileges to certain properties or certain places, and certain privileges, rights, or whatever the case may be, that somehow they intersect. Those communities can work together in order to get certain goals completed. There are lots of events in our area that utilize ham radio operation for their events. That is another good example of how community crossover can benefit both or more of communities. Reason number 6 is an off-season hobby. You have a hobby that you can utilize during the on-season. Granted, for some of us, weather doesn't necessarily end our season, because I've talked about before how I like to winter camp, and a lot of people do. So you don't necessarily have an off-season, but if you do, and a lot of people do, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, it is a hobby that you can tie into your normal hobby that then in your off-season you can still utilize. I have my radio in my truck, and I have portable radios, but I also have one, actually multiple, inside of my home base that we talked about earlier, that I can utilize in inclement weather. It's obviously more desirable to be outside, but when it gets cold like this, today it's in the teens, I'm able to comfortably operate my radio from my home little base. It's a great way to spread information, which will get us to reason number 7. And reason number 7 is it's a great way to share. Like I said before, you have communities within both of these different hobbies and lifestyles, and just the same, you have ham radio communities, clubs. So if you get involved, it's a great way to share your other hobbies and interests. I participate in a weekly net. For those who are not ham radio operators, a net is essentially kind of an on-the-air meet and greet. Some organizations use it more as a on-the-air meeting versus a meet and greet. However, my particular club utilizes the net as more of a meet and greet. You sign in, and then everyone signs in at first, then the net operator, the net control, will then go through the list, and then you will basically give a short synopsis of what it is you've been up to in ham radio and any information you'd like to share. It's not necessarily always restricted to ham radio. We've discussed many topics in and out of ham radio, which includes outdoors, because I have discovered that a lot of my local fellow operators are also outdoorsmen. So we have a tendency to utilize our radio time to, for lack of a better term, advocate for our other hobbies. And it gives us a great median in which to do so that doesn't require necessarily the use of the internet. I say not necessarily because there are some internet-based ham radio stuff, which I'm not going to get to in this video, but it's another way in which to share. Just like any other hobby, your exposure to other people then gives you an audience to spread the message or whatever else it is that you are interested in. Reason number 8 is another hobby that gives you another knowledge base. If you're an outdoorsman, you probably already have some form of knowledge base that is extremely useful to you in and outside of your outdoor excursions. The addition of ham radio to that little repertoire will give you additional skills and resources. Granted, it may seem a little odd when we're talking about an outdoor show, because most of the stuff when it comes to the ham radio will be technologically based. But it gives you, like I said, another skill set to add to your repertoire. And the reason that's important for outdoorsmen is number 9 that we're coming up to, emergency communications. Reason number 9 is emergency communications. Now, you think we'd already talked about this. We've talked about both cell phones suck and basic communications with your outdoors group, but this is actually a separate creature all unto itself. Emergency communications. Let's face it, we as outdoorsmen like to go places that other people do not. Because of the mud, dirt, grime, and bugs, or whatever the particular reason for their not wanting to get out in nature is, we are there. And we're there to help our other fellow outdoorsmen should an emergency arise. More people on the air means that there's more people there when you need them. So using a ham radio operator and an outdoorsman may be the only lifeline that person has, communication-wise, to get the information of their emergency out. Or you may be the only person nearby in order to render aid necessary to keep that person alive until more advanced life-saving support arrives. Reason number 10. And while we've already kind of touched on this, if you've noticed a pattern already, that a lot of these reasons kind of tie into each other, reason number 10 is the fact that the hobby is, in a lot of ways, disappearing. The original ham radio operators are aging out and unfortunately passing away, becoming what they call silent keys. The fact of the matter is we have modern technology that works for us 90% of the time, if not a little bit less, but it's easy to get lost in the convenience of modern technology. And something like radio, just especially to the younger people coming up, seems like a waste of time, money, and effort. But at the end of the day, just like any other skill, many of which we as outdoorsmen utilize that would seem archaic, will disappear without passing it on to the next generation. And again, we as outdoorsmen should appreciate that particular danger. Let's face it, most of the things that we do in the outdoors, especially when it comes to some of our more extreme skills, in a modern, convenient, technological society, you kind of would think to yourself and say, do I really need the skill? I've had that argument many times with people who are not even that much younger than me. I am 32, okay? And I've talked to, people who are less than a decade younger than me, there's that great divide, I feel like, sometimes with myself and people in their 20s. Even just that short divide, some of them, it's just enough years that they don't remember the same history that I do. And they don't have the same, I don't want to say struggles, because that's not quite the word I'm looking for, but they have never utilized some of the skills and technology that growing up I had to. And someone who's older than myself is probably chuckling, going, "You have no idea, son." And that's probably true, but that problem hasn't gotten better. Technology's only gotten more advanced, and people become more dependent on it. Cell phones were not like they are now when I was growing up, which, again, I'm not that old, I'm only 32. But I'm looking at newer cell phones that come out to the point, and the whole concept is just, it blows my mind. I'm recording this entire thing on a cell phone. I wouldn't even have thought that such a thing was possible in the 90s, or the 80s for that matter, growing up. So now people go, why do I need to mess with this hobby when I've got this great little device that, in and of itself, I can't hold it, obviously, because I'm talking to it right now. But why do I need this ancient technology when I have a small device that is more powerful than just about everything on the planet when we put a man on the moon? Well, the answer is because that technology has failed time and time again, and we see it, and people just don't get that. We're talking Katrina, we're talking Irma, we're talking Harvey, we're talking, I keep coming up with hurricanes, but you can think of any natural disaster that has temporarily destroyed the network, the resources, the utilities, whatever you want to call it. But when Puerto Rico got hit recently, the only thing coming out was ham radio communications. That's the only thing that was coming off the island because the cell network was down. There was no power to most of the island. It was ham radio was where it was at, and ham radio is relatively low power to operate. You can run an HF off of a car battery, an HF radio off a car battery, and I've done it where I've run it off the battery of my truck and talked to people in other continents, okay? So this seemingly quote-unquote ancient technology, which I use that as with some mirth. It's not ancient by any means, but let's face it, anything that's not the brand new iPhone, Samsung, whatever, people kind of looked at it and scoff with especially like I said again, the younger people will look at it and scoff because it's kind of why are we bothering with this? We have cell phones. Well, cell phones aren't always there for you, and especially again with people who are supposedly outdoorsmen, you know that where you're going is not developed. Cell phones are not regulated, but they're run by corporations who are there to make money. They're not going to put a tower in the middle of nowhere where no one, a few people a year are going to utilize it, because why would they? It gives you options, and again, that cell phone's not always going to be there for you. I had an incident a while back in which I came across a situation that required immediate help that was beyond my scope of capability of rendering at the time, and my cell phone completely did not work. I was in an area that was extremely rural, and there was no cell signal. I'm not talking about just a little bit. I'm talking none. No service. Right across. There were no bars. Zero. Zilch. Nada. And I had to utilize my ham radio in order to get help for the people who were involved. No, it all ended well because I was able to hit a repeater from my location. I have a decent setup in my truck, and it all worked out. Another good example, which I didn't have to utilize, and I wasn't even an operator at the time, but I wish I would have been, is in 2016 we took a trip to Wyoming. We were camping on top of the Snowy Range Mountains. I could be saying that wrong. I'd have to look it up, but I'm not going to. But we were west of Laramie, and we were camping up in the mountains, and my truck at the time was having some issues. Something didn't feel right. I decided, let's get off the mountain today because there is, zero service. There's no towers on top of a mountain. So we came off the mountain, and as soon as we did, the transfer case locked up in my truck. So with no cell service, that could have been very bad up on top of that mountain. And again, a slightly more archaic piece of technology may have been the difference between climbing down that mountain by myself without my vehicle and my supplies and being able to call help to me. So I mean, there it is. There's 10 reasons why I think that you as an outdoorsman should be a ham radio operator. Hopefully you see my point on it. And number 10, I realized, was the longest that I spoke on it because it is a disappearing hobby, and it's a crucial hobby, and I think that it's just another one of those things. If you don't lose it, or if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So 1 and 10 kind of tying together, but like I pointed out many times throughout this video, all the points tying together, and these are my 10 reasons of why you, as an outdoorsman, should also be a ham radio operator. Thanks for listening to my rant today. And for you ham radio operators, 73 to you, W0KNG. And as a PS, I just want to throw this out there because I can already see the jokes. I realized when I was reviewing the footage that I am wearing a Ford Racing hat today. The truck that failed before I started getting the Found on Road Dead jokes was the only not Ford I've ever owned, was the one that blew up on me in Wyoming. I used to have a 05 Chevy Colorado, which was a giant steaming pile of crap. I had gotten a really good deal on it at the time, and it became just nothing but a giant time sink and money sink, and it sucked all of the soul of those around it. Not literally, but the thing was a giant pile of poo. And as soon as I got an excuse to get rid of it, which was it blowing up in Wyoming, as soon as that happened, that sucker was gone. I couldn't take it anymore. So there was a seal that had failed, which is actually something that could happen to any truck, which is what caused the fluid to leak from the transfer case and eventually seize because there was no fluid left in there for lubrication. While you could there's plenty of argument that wasn't necessarily the truck's fault, that was a maintenance issue. And at the time, while I would normally work on my own vehicle, I hadn't been underneath it in a while because we were moving a lot in those days. Up until that point, so that was the last time we had moved, was right before that happened. So I had taken it to garages and stuff, and I should have done the checking myself because I don't usually trust garages. But in this case, I had, and there was a leak that went unnoticed, which was very obvious once I was actually underneath it. But that's neither here nor there. the reason it was a giant pile of poo was because it wasn't just that one issue. Everything was falling apart on that truck. That thing just needed so much work. It was beyond ridiculous. But I just needed to throw that out there real quick before I foresaw the Ford comments coming, and I just wanted you guys to know that it was a Chevy.